Hi, this is the video for the home connection in the library. And before we begin, I just want you to double check that your name is at the top of your paper, and if you're in my class, your number as well. Just double check that right now before we get started and write it if you haven't yet. Our in the library problem starts with some circle graphs, and it says pie graphs, and it says the librarian at our school asked the fourth and fifth graders to vote on their favorite kind of book. The circle graphs below show the results. Use the information to answer the questions below. So I'm going to skip A and B right now because I feel like those are ones you can figure out after we do C, D, and E if you don't know how to do them already. So we're going to start with C, but I do want to make note that A is asking about the fourth graders. So make sure you're looking at the fourth grade graph. We're going to do the fifth graders though. So what fraction of the fifth graders said they like fantasy books best, and how do you know? Well, I'm going to look at the fifth grade circle graph and I'm going to look at the key. I want to know about fantasy books. So fantasy is the lighter gray color and it doesn't have a number on it, but I see that this is 3/4 and this is 1/8. This looks the same size as 1/8, and I also know that half of 1/4 is 1/8. So this is the same as this. So I'm going to say it's 1/8 because it is half of the 1/4 piece that's left after 3/4 is filled in. Okay, so that's going to be the way I'm going to explain it. You might say, because I can see it's the same size as the other 1/8, however works for you for what you see. Now D asks, if there are 112 fifth graders, how many like nonfiction books best? Show your work. So this is asking us to figure out a fraction of a whole number. And we see that 1/8 like nonfiction. So I need 1/8 of 112. I'm going to make a ratio table that shows 112, and that's 1, okay, because that's the whole group. And then 1/2 of 112, I'm going to divide that in half. So in order to divide it in half, I'm going to think half of 100 is 50 and half of 12 is 6. So 56 is the same as 1/2. Then I'm going to go down to 1/4 because I know 1/4 is half of a half. And if you don't understand that, let's draw a chart here. Here's 1/4, here's 1/2, and this piece is 1/2 of my half. So I'm going to divide 56 in half. So half of 50 is 25. Half of 6 is 3. So 28 is 1/2 of 56. And then I'm going to go one step further because 1/8 is half of that fourth, and divide 28 in half, and that's an easy one. So it's 14. So my answer is 14 fifth graders. Okay. And then last on this side, E asks, what fraction of the fifth graders said they liked fiction books best? How do you know? Well, this is an easy one. I can just go up to the graph and say fiction, dark gray, 3/4, because the graph tells me. All right, so those three are now done. Go back and do A and B using those three as your guide. I think you'll find them pretty simple to do if you use this information to help you. Okay, let's look at the back. And again, I'm going to skip 2 because I think you can figure it out on your own once we do 3. 3 says, Sarah and her mother bought some vegetables at the farmer's market yesterday. They bought 2 3/4 pounds of cabbage, 1/2 a pound of onions, and 1 3/8 pounds of carrots. How many pounds of vegetables did they buy in all? Show your work. So I know I need to add them up because it says how many vegetables in all. So 2 3/4 plus 1/2 plus 1 3/8. Now on the other side, we just talked about how fourths and halves and eighths are related. So if I have 3/8, I've got 1, 2, 3/8. So I'm going to leave that fraction alone. I'm not going to forget about my whole numbers, but right now I'm just trying to add up the fractions. If I look at 1/2 right here, I can see that's the same as 1, 2, 3, 4/8. And I know that 3/4 is this much of my circle. So that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6/8 in it. Now that I have common denominators, I can add that up. And I've got 6 plus 4 is 10, plus 3 is 13/8. Now 13/8 is an improper fraction, so I'm going to turn it into a mixed number. So 8 goes into 13 one time, and then I have to ask myself how many are left over. 13 minus 8 is 5, so I have 5/8. Now I can't forget about my whole numbers that were back up here. So I need to add those up with 1 5/8. So 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 2 is 4. 4 5/8 pounds of vegetables. Okay, so you can always use a little drawing to help you. Maybe that will help you up here with trying to figure out your common denominator of 3/4 and 1/2. Now, the challenge. Madison went to the mall with her big sister last weekend. Their mom dropped them off at 1 o'clock and said, "I'll pick you up at 2:30. The girls spent 5/6 of an hour at the toy store, 2/3 of an hour at the pet store, and 1/2 an hour at the food court. When they got back to the bench to meet their mom, she was already there. She said, 'Where have you been? I've been waiting blank of an hour for you.' How long had their mom been waiting for them?" This question has a lot of pieces, but the first thing is going to be to add up our fractions of 5/6 plus 2/3 plus 1/2. And I'm going to turn them into clock times because this is a clock question. So 5/6 of an hour is the same as 50/60ths plus 2/3 of an hour. A third of an hour is 20 minutes. So 2/3 would be 40/60ths plus half an hour is 30/60ths. So if I add all those up, I have 50 plus 40 is 90 plus 30 is 120/60ths. And we know that 120/60ths is the same as 2 or 2 hours. Now, is that how long she waited for her? No, because she dropped her off at 1 o'clock and said she'd pick her up at 2:30. So that is 1.5 hours. She was supposed to only be there for 1.5 hours. So we have to figure out the difference between 2 hours and 1.5 hours, which I hope you can figure out is a half hour. So she waited for 1/2 hour. There, I hope that that was helpful. Don't forget to go back and finish the ones that we didn't do together. And if you still have questions, always feel free to ask.